Here are some little facts about these little dots. Here are some little facts about these little dots. 1. This little dot likes saying
你好
Apa kabar?
வணக்கம்
2. This little dot likes hawker centers. 3. This little dot lives at Kampong Lorong Bangkok.
4. This little dot has never been to Marina Bay Sands. 5. This little dot likes drawing stick figures holding hands.
6.
This little dot remembers
Nadra,
Maria,
Independence.
abandon,
spirit,
control,
Men.
sons.
7. This little dot is blind.
8. This little dot.
Listens to whispers.
Where is the light at the end of the tunnel? You're not special. These walls are as empty as that of the
9. This little dot
Meets.
a lot of people.
10. This little dot is trying to be perfect.
11. This little dot travels a lot.
They seek. They dream. They ascend.
12. This little dot always comes home.
13. This little dot tells new stories.
14. This little dot does not have color. It is colored by you. Here are some little facts about these little dots.
Dear all, welcome to the opening of the 8th Poetry Festival Singapore. And I have to hold for a minute. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Eric Tinsay Valles. I'm a director of Poetry Festival Singapore. And you've just watched the opening film entitled, Here are some little facts about These Little Dots by Ker Wei. It's an exploration of the diversity of nationhood and identity against a kaleidoscope of abstract imagery, symbolism, and a variety of dots. So that was adapted from a poem by a former mentee of mine in the Creative Arts Program of the Ministry of Education's Creative Gifted Education Branch, Tan Wan Gee. And she was also a winner in the poetry national poetry competition a few years back. Right, so it's wonderfully heartwarming to see everybody here, dear friends. Last year we were here in the same room, except that it was just practically the directors of the Poetry Festival who were here. But this year we have more friends with us, so we are celebrating our resurgence after 2 years of the pandemic. And we also would like to say hi to our friends in Canada, the US, Kenya, and other places because Poetry Festival Singapore is going digital and global as well. And so poets and other writers are not new to engagement with new media. In the past 2 years, we've had to adapt to these new media in light of COVID-19. And this year, Poetry Festival Singapore is doing that again. So we have a US-based poet, for example, who's conducting a workshop online with mostly Singaporean participants. And we have several workshops as well that are happening online. And on behalf of Poetry Festival Singapore, I would like to extend our warmest welcome to our guests and friends, especially to our guest of honor, Madame Go Beng Choo. Good evening, Madame Go. And good evening to our advisor and mentor, Emeritus Professor Edwin Thambu, who has been an inspiration, and he's always with us at the opening of our festival. And tonight is no exception. We also would like to welcome Dr. Jonathan Gander, who's the head of the School of Creative Industries in LaSalle College of the Arts. Also, Dr. Venka Purushottanam, Deputy President and Provost of LaSalle College of the Arts. And our many friends, also Ms. Maytan, Ms. Aruna Johnson, and our friends at the National Arts Council, poets, artists, and friends in the Ngian Kongsi Library, and those at home online. So Poetry Festival Singapore is a registered society that promotes poetry in Singapore's 4 official languages: Malay, Tamil, Chinese, and English. And it's made possible through volunteers from the executive committee, to our intern tonight. And we also are able to have this opening ceremony and the other events at this festival because of our partnerships with LaSalle College of the Arts, the Arts House, the Singapore Book Council, the Ministry of Education, Gifted Education Branch, National University of Singapore, Nanyang Technological University's Asia Creative Writing Program, Republic Polytechnic, National Library, the Indian Women's Association, Sanrakshan, to name just a few of our partners. And PFS is working towards a multilingual, multicultural presentation of Singapore's poetry, collectively interpreted and represented through the various arts. And to open tonight's program, I would like to invite our Vice President of PFS's Executive Committee, Ms. Michelle Loh. She is a lecturer in the School of Creative Industries, LaSalle College of the Arts. Ms. Loh, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see friends. And thank you, Eric, for that wonderful opening speech. And it is truly the efforts and contributions of everyone present here that the Poetry Festival can be here for the 8th year. So we are here for 8 years already. And if you recall, and if you were with us from the beginning, Poetry Festival had its launch right at the campus green, right in the middle of LaSalle College of the Arts. And at that time, we had publishers joining us, selling a lot of books, and it was a great fanfare. This year's theme on resurgence is really with hopes that we can bring back again this wonderful spirit of poetry in 4 languages, and not just that, but also to bring together all the different stakeholders of poetry in Singapore, our writers, our educators, our migrant workers, our students, our publishers, institutions, and also government agencies. All these have made the Poetry Festival possible. You saw all these volunteers that come on board, and I can tell you very frankly that all of us are only but volunteers. So we really try our best to bring across Singapore's multicultural, multilingual poetry through this platform. This year is special. And this year, at this moment, I want to especially also acknowledge our literary pioneer, Mr. Ying Poyon, who passed away earlier this year. He was Singapore's pride. He is a prolific writer in all rights. So we are very privileged to have with us today his wife, Madam Goh Beng Choo, Wu Mingzhu 女士，谢谢你。So she's here with us tonight, and we want to appreciate also Madam Goh's own contributions to Singapore's literary scene as a woman of strong standing and as a literary translator. We are grateful also for Madam Goh's donations to the National Poetry Competition, without which it's not going to happen at all. All top prizes of the National Poetry Competition have been renamed the Ying Poyon Prize. Thank you, Madam Goh. LaSalle has been and continues to be a strong and consistent supporter, partner, collaborator, and friend of Poetry Festival. And I would like to take this chance to recognize this special bond and express deepest appreciation to Provost Dr. Venka, Director of the Library, Dr. Mala Nadesan, and her wonderful team at the back. So we have Yati, Lani, Jie Yun, and Asha, who's not with us today. And our ICT and Facilities Department, who's right at the back, whom we can't see, but they've arranged all these wonderfully for us. Zach, Kyung, Zahidi, Zul, and Malik, thank you so much. And other esteemed colleagues who cannot be with us here today. Thank you all. So what brought us all these 8 years? What brought us together? How come we can still exist? Nothing but a calling to stand by and stand up for the transformative power of poetry. Poetry has the power to connect souls deeply, richly, on terms and conditions that can only be conveyed through words. And our words in Malay, English, Chinese, and Tamil are ever so powerful and conjures up imageries, emotions, and visions that brings us to the past and forward us to the present. And all of these presented on one unified but diverse palette of Singapore. This year's Poetry Festival presents a myriad of events, starting off with poetry reading with Ko Bak Song, who's right there with us. So his event is starting at 7:30. Do stay back if you can. So Mr. Ko is our colleague and special friend, and he's also just completed his Poet in Residence with the National Gallery. That is happening immediately after the opening ceremony, and thereafter we have 28 different events from tomorrow night all the way to the 8th of August across different venues at LaSalle, right here in this library, online, there will be live streaming and recorded versions, and also at the Arts House. So you can follow our Instagram Poetry Festival SG for more details. I shall now close with a poem. I chose one from Yeng Pui On's colorful series of poems. I love that collection. It comes in a box, thin booklets, and it's blue, red, yellow, green. And I chose one from the Green Book, Poems number 4. It bears the same theme as our festival this year, Resurgence. So what a coincidence. So I'm going to read The Non-Existent Night, Night with a K. This poem is translated by Judith Huang and Madame Goh herself. Allow me to read to you in English and then in Chinese. The Non-Existent Night. The night does not exist. While other nights scurry to the king's grand banquet, desperately reciting a litany of made-up ancestries and conferring medals on one another, the non-existent night cannot be found among the royal troops. He is invisible, except for his armor, which springs into action in the face of evil, except for the lonesome, noble soul encased within. The night does not exist. Only his indefatigable spirit, his love for truth and justice. The night does not exist. I will now read in Chinese. 不存在的歧视。歧视不存在。当其他的骑士都忙着赶赴皇上的宴会，纷纷背诵自传的族谱，互赠勋章。不存在的骑士，在皇家收编的队伍之外，你看不见他。除了一身随时邪恶应战的盔甲，除了盔甲里 孤独但完整的灵魂，其实不存在。除了他的精神守则，他对公理与正义的爱，其实不存在。You may feel invisible, but you are knights. May your love for truth and poetry prevail, just like the non-existent night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That reminds me of Soren Kierkegaard's The Knight of Faith. Right? And in a way, the people here tonight are knights of faith, knights of poetry. And up next, we have our guest of honor, Madame Beng Choo, and she will deliver a speech. She's a multi-talented literary translator. She's also a journalist. And she epitomizes what it truly means to be a lifelong learner. Right? So she represents the estate of the late cultural medallion winner Ying Pui-on, major donor of the National Poetry Competition. So, Madame Go, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? Okay. I would like to thank the directors of Poetry Festival Singapore 2022 for inviting me to be the guest of honor of this event. I've been asked to speak about my husband's work in 5 minutes. My husband is Ying Pui-on, Ying Pei-an. He was a very hardworking writer. He wrote his first poem when he was 15. In the 1970s, he operated 2 bookshops where he sold Chinese language books on literature, history, and philosophy, imported from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and mainland China. He also wrote a column featuring social commentaries for a Chinese paper. He had a large following because of his humor and bold criticism of the authority. He published his first novel, 一个像我这样的男人, A Man Like Me, in 1978. The novel won him the book award given by the then National Book Development Council. Subsequently, he went on to win the Singapore Literature Prize for his other works, novels, 画室, 骚动, 戏服, and 我与我自己的2、3、4. Every novel by him features a unique style. A core theme runs through his novels: man's struggle to stay afloat in a competitive society and to make his life meaningful. A Chinese educated man himself, Pei-an's novels focus on the plight of the Chinese educated who suffered from the decline of the language and a sense of displacement. Pei-an was well-read and familiar with the novels of several Nobel Prize winners through Chinese translations, such as Italo Calvino, Saul Bellow, Salman Rushdie, Milan Kundera. Pei-an was inspired by some of them in writing technique. Besides literature, he read Western philosophers and favored Sartre. He upheld existentialism throughout his life and in his writing. Another philosopher he often spoke about is Erich Fromm. He liked to share his thoughts on Fromm's famous book, The Art of Loving, with people who went to his talks. Pei-an was a firm believer of Confucianism as well, and he liked the self-reflection aspect of Confucianism, which advocates introspection. Pei-an has published 29 titles. Besides novel and poem, he wrote short story, play, and literary critique. There is a collection of essays on the relationship between reading and living, which is being prepared for publication next year. Pei-an has so far written at least 120 poems, in various subjects. There are scores of children's poems which are rich in fascinating images. His representative poem titled On the Operating Table, 手术台上, is 150 lines long. One of the happiest things that happened to him is the launch of the Italian translation of Art Studio, 画室, in Mantova, northern Italy, in early 2003. Pei An has left behind a rich literary legacy. There's so much to enjoy in his writing, and I really hope more people would come to know his works and benefit from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Go, and your exposition on the legacy of the late Cultural Medallion winner, Ing Pei An. Next, we have a keynote lecture, and since we're going digital and global, we're having the program leader for the master's program of creative writing in LaSalle College of the Arts, Dr. Rosalind Prosser. She has publications in life writing, creative nonfiction, and poetry, and an Australian Research Council linkage grant with the History Trust and Migration Museum of South Australia, investigating internal migration. So she can't be with us today, but we're happy to have her deliver her keynote lecture from Adelaide, South Australia. So, ladies and gentlemen, please sit back and ponder.
Thank you for joining this session today. I'll be talking about the topic, Is Poetry Dangerous? This presentation will discuss the work of Bengali poet Mr. Zakir Hossain Hohon. I will be presenting a close reading of Zakir Hossain's poem, First Draft. Zakir Hossain Hohon is a writer, poet, journalist, and photographer who was born in Dhaka, and he is a graduate of the National University of Bangladesh. He moved to Singapore in 2003 for work. Zakir's poems are extremely well received. He won first prize for 2 consecutive years at the Migrant Workers Poetry Competition in both 2014 and 2015. In June 2022, his work pass was not renewed after 19 years working in Singapore. Texts and other forms of communication are produced under conditions of possibility. For Hossain, the condition of possibility that he writes under are his status as a migrant worker. For this poem, the conditions of the COVID pandemic and the ways that migrant workers were managed are another condition for writing. Sherwin Mendoza states that although migrant workers in Singapore are forced to operate in circumstances not chosen by themselves, the migrant poetry competitions have allowed some of them to articulate through poetry both individual and collective subjectivities. On June 22nd, 2022, the Ministry of Manpower explained in a statement that some of Zakir's public writing was misleading, false, or deliberately provocative, and that he had overstayed his welcome. Along with this statement, a comment was also made on renewal of work passes and how that system worked. This presentation will not be about this decision on non-renewal of the work pass, but will discuss the idea that words and meanings in poetry, song, and other texts may constitute and be seen as a form of danger. The poem First Draft was published in Southeast Asia Globe, a member-driven online platform that promotes the values of independence, creativity, plus optimism and openness. Southeast Asia Globe
published a series of works under the heading Tales of the Pandemic. The poem, First Draft, appeared on May 11, 2020 as part of this series. First Draft takes the form of a documentary poem and is a commentary on contemporary life for the migrant worker in Singapore during the COVID pandemic. As such, it is a particular experience that is being documented. Poetry has the capacity to record feeling, emotions, and ideas, as well as the capacity to record and document lived experience, as well as place, space, landscape, and specificities of events. This is what gives poetry its difference to other documents of life or journalistic stories, the capacity to write about feelings and potentially produce empathy in the reader. Sarah Allers and Nikki Hurd describe documentary poetry and documentary poetics as a diverse range of poetic projects that either make use of historical materials or narrate historical events. As several critics have pointed out, documentary poetry constitutes a long tradition that goes as far back as the poems of Lucretius, Ovid, and Virgil. Documentary poetry is largely a 20th century construction, and it's shifted in relation to technological changes that transform the landscape of poetic composition and circulation. A key aspect of documentary poetry is that it engages with the terrains of labour precarity, ecological collapse, and widening racial inequalities and violence. Such forms work in tandem with socially engaged content to address historical and political realities. In the contemporary moment, major contributions to documentary poetic traditions have been from Black, Indigenous, and people of colour writers who innovate with documentary practices and forms. End of quote. Zakir Hussein's poem tells the story of the migrant worker experience during COVID with a series of observations and facts. Importantly, the poem is not told from the first-person point of view and uses the pronouns they and we at different points. He introduces the word COVID in capital letters to situate the reader in this time of the pandemic, thus signalling the significance of this globally devastating event. The word COVID has become a major signifier and a hyperobject. Hyperobjects are objects which have a vitality to them, but you can't touch them. They are things like race or class or climate change. Their effects may be experienced even if they cannot be necessarily touched. I Googled this question, is COVID a hyperobject? And was led to an article about Timothy Morton. Timothy Morton coined the term hyperobject. And in the New Yorker article that I found, Morton responds to the question from the journalist Morgan Meese, where she says, I called Morton on the phone. It was April 2020. COVID-19 was tearing through the US. Is COVID-19 a hyperobject? I asked them. It's the ultimate hyperobject, Morton said. The hyperobject of our age. It's literally inside us. As a useful framework for reading the poem First Draft, we might be interested in hyperobjects because of the ways that relatedness works. The poet and the migrant worker are all in relation with us, as we are all connected globally in a pandemic. The connectedness that occurs through a global experience of the pandemic includes all, or as some say, COVID does not distinguish between race, age, class, or any other factor. Being afraid is not isolated to the migrant worker, but the experience of fear and the reality of life is different. Poets are able to speak about fear in ways that show feelings. They are able to describe visceral sensations that alert the reader to what an experience might be like. This is why First Draft is a significant documentary poem that works to inform of material conditions and how they affect real human subjects. Here is Zakir Hossain documenting the conditions of life for the migrant worker. Huddling together in a single room, the room is stuffy with 2 ceiling fans working overtime. The administration has ordered them to maintain 1 feet's distance while standing, sitting, eating, and sleeping. Some measure the room with tape. The administration has stated wearing masks is mandatory, but they do not have masks. Dormitory, administration, company, who will give them masks? The bathroom, dirty, dingy, fetid. A single bathroom serves more than 100. Nobody has cleaned it for days, afraid of speaking their minds. The poem is both a documentary and a narrative form, using a mode of address that incorporates the whole of the migrant worker through the use of they throughout. With this they, the poet gestures towards the group of migrant workers as a mass, but refers to the ways the migrant worker is seen from the outside as a they that we look at. It also references their unknowability. Knowing more about the migrant worker through the text of a poem allows for empathy and understanding. This is what makes poetry dangerous. To know the other as having fears, loneliness, love, sadness, family, as the reader does. Empathy and sympathy may influence the ways that the migrant worker is seen. A long tradition of poetry and a song that allows for insight into the world of another has always been feared. The economy of a poem, the shortness and the brevity, allows for a message and a story to be heard without a lengthy journalistic article that might tell the story of the migrant worker during COVID. The other technique that Hossain uses is that of repetition or anaphora. Repetition is used to emphasize an idea or a concept and emphasizes the meaning of the word. In the poem, Hossain uses this device with his use of the word afraid. Etymologically, the word afraid is a rare case of an English adjective that never stands before a noun. In effect, it becomes noun-like as it stands in for so much. Zakir makes a strong point and reinforces this idea. In this case, the idea that they are afraid, not just of COVID, but of everything. This device of repetition of the word afraid demonstrates the poet's awareness of the rhetorical nature of the poem, a rhetoric that in the end may trouble through pointing out that the migrant worker is indeed afraid. And this fear is what connects the migrant worker to the rest of the community of Singapore and elsewhere. Are we not all afraid? Zakir Hossain says in the poem, They are afraid to read. They are afraid to write. They are afraid to draw. They are afraid to take photos. They are afraid to make films. They are afraid to learn, to gaze. They are even afraid of appreciation for their success. Shh. They stay silent. Community leaders, journalists, and literary folk are all part of this discussion in the poem. The migrant worker situation is not only pointed out to the administration, the company, the dormitory, but also to these others well-meaning. Zakia states, even the journalists are afraid of someone, and sometimes literary folks and intellectuals visit them too. They inspire them to read, speak up, write, draw, take photographs, make films, but emphasize that their art should be calm and not expressive. Who are they? Are they really surviving with this burden of fear? Hossein uses the term modern-day slaves, a well-known term. In the poem, he uses single quotation marks around the term. The same term is used in many news reports and academic articles, and was first coined by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in 2008. Zakir Hossein is using this term as a citation and a reference. He does not devise this idea himself, but uses it purposefully to draw attention to the living conditions during the COVID outbreak. Here he is. Their identity documents carry the seal of modern-day slaves. This has at least saved them from an identity crisis. The use of humour here with the words saving them from an identity crisis demonstrates the writer's understanding of popular culture trends. Identity crises are surely a first and developed world issue, but here Zakir Hossein shows his knowledge of such an idea and uses it masterfully. This provides a lightness to the poem and signals a humorous or even satirical comment on identity. First Draft is a dense work of documentary poetry that tells a complex story of COVID and the experience of the migrant worker. Migrant workers are given voice through poetry and written works. Listening to these stories might humanize our own capacities and lead to a more compassionate understanding, at the same time allowing for a valuing of the poet as a recorder and documenter of the social and the cultural. According to statistics from the Ministry of Manpower, in 2018 there were 1,386,000 reported foreign workers in Singapore. These include 253,800 who held a work permit to be a foreign domestic worker and 280,500 who held a work permit for construction work. In the panel that discussed this, recorded in Rice Media in an article, it was cited that the antidote to objectification is empathy. This starts with mindset change, according to Member of Parliament Louis Ng, who was one of the panelists discussing the issue. Poetry must surely bring about empathy. As we can see, the poem documents the conditions of possibility and presents us with a unique documentary poem as it records for history the effects and conditions of the migrant worker during the pandemic. And I would like to just finish here by talking about Victor Jara. And Victor Jara was a Chilean poet, a songwriter, an actor, a director. a political activist, and a teacher. And Victor Hara was detained on September 12, 1973, at the State Technical University where he worked. Along with hundreds of students and colleagues, he was forced to jog with his hands behind his neck to the stadium, 6 blocks away. Witnesses report he was beaten at the time of his arrest and en route to the stadium, where an army officer recognised him. Victor Hara was tortured and murdered. Victor Hara was a very important poet and, as we have seen, a significant documenter of the times that he lived through. In his last work, Chile Stadium, Victor Hara says, "There are 5,000 of us here in this small part of the city. 5,000. How many of us are there in all, in the cities and in all the country? Here we are, 10,000 hands who plant the seeds and keep the factories running. So much humanity." Thank you very much, and I hope you've enjoyed the discussion of the poem First Draft. And I'd be very interested to get some feedback, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prosser. There are many ways of reading a poem, and we can read Zakir's COVID poems as a stark historical record of this exceptional epoch that we are in, and as an inspiration for Singaporeans of all races and classes to reach out to our foreign migrant worker brothers and sisters, right? And it might please you to know that in this festival, we've actually invited migrant workers to join the mainstream poets, not to read to other migrant workers in silos, but to speak to a mainstream audience in the women's reading and in the Get Luckier launch later this weekend. Okay, so next we're honored to feature the Ingpeyan award-winning entries in Malay and Tamil in the National Poetry Competition 2022. In reading order, our winners are Naishwa Muhammad Horib in Malay in the Super Junior category. She is a secondary 1 student from Ahmad Ibrahim Secondary School, and she enjoys looking at sunsets. We just missed it. And second, we have Fadil Fatsil, also in Malay, senior category. And he is a Malay language and literature enthusiast. And with his interest in Malay literature, Fadil seeks to convey the feelings and experiences of the younger generation on social issues. Third is Afifa Ahmad, Tamil language, super junior category. That's people who are 14 or younger. Afifa is a primary 4 student in St. Margaret's Primary School, and she enjoys writing poems in Tamil and English. Fourth is Priya Jaikumar, Tamil language senior category. So Priya has been in Singapore for the past 10 years, and reading books is her hobby. Her poems won in several competitions, and she has also won prizes in different venues. And last, we have Ramila N, Tamil language junior category. She is a secondary 2 student from Cedar Girls Secondary School, and she is interested in performing music and writing. They will be joined on the gujang by Miss Luan Ling, who graduated from Shenyang Music College, and she is a gujang player and currently teaches gujang in secondary and primary schools in Singapore. So please sit back and enjoy the readings and the gujang performance.
Do you have the poem? You have to read your poem.
Should we start playing first, then you read? Okay.
Hei, diriku, janganlah berputus asa walaupun engkau menghadapi semua masalah itu. Berfikir negatif tidak baik untuk hatimu yang lemah. Hei, diriku, sentiasa bersabar walaupun engkau sakit. Ujian dunia ini akhirnya akan berlalu. Dunia memang ada rasa manis dan pahit. Hei, diriku, kamu sudah berjaya untuk kembalikan senyumanmu. Aku besar hati untukmu. Aku tahu kamu boleh menang kesusahanmu. Hei, diriku, terima kasih untuk menahan hingga akhir waktu. Thank you.
Take a minute.
Di sudut ruang berulang, keratapi mentari di sebalik kaca, mengagumi jalur jingga jelang senja. Di sebalik kabus awan, bau cerca nista, seolah menutupi kecelangan sinar suria nyata padaku. Tetap satu lukisan indah belaka. Coretan kisah insan-insan kota bahasa kedua. Meski ramai mengaku tidak gemar melihatnya, mereka kata mentari sudah lama terbenam. Tapi aku kata mentaliti mereka yang lama tenggelam. Mereka kata mentari telah lama bertemu malam. Tetap ku berkata, sinar pagi bakal muncul salam. Berguguranlah cebis-cebis analisis kritis menitis. Bak hujan lebat menyembunyikan mentari. Tak kalah ramai menanti mengejar senja berlari. Meninggalkan kepekatan malam, sunyi dan sepi. Pada saat itulah berkedipanlah cahaya astro di langit. Berpusu-pusu mereka memuja bintang sensasi. Sementara mentari tak terbenam kala ia terbenam. Memperkasa sinaran dengan kehangatan isi dan visi sebagai bekalan kala siang datang lagi. Kini fajar mula menyingsing pergi. Mentari siang beranikan diri mendakap langit. Menginjak-injak, menginjak-injak, perlahan seperti bayi baru jejak ke bumi. Dengan berkat pengalaman dan pembaharuan, mentari sudah menaiki carta udara. Dengan tujahan cahaya segar yang rasa indah menjadi sinar gemilang di balik kaca perdana. Sumber keriangan anak bangsa, tua dan muda. Begitupun mereka masih berpaling muka. Kini terinspirasi dengan butang berwarna merah, tak lagi suka dengan mentari di tanah air duka. Sepanjang masa ini, aku hanya sebagai pemerhati, menikmati sinaran mentari pagi, sementara mereka di sebelah sana menyambuti benaman mentari malam. Thank you.
வகுப்பறை என் அறைக்கு என் வகுப்பு வந்தது. அந்த சிறிய அறை ஒரு சிறிய சிறை வீட்டில் இருந்து படித்தேன். எனது பள்ளி பறந்து வந்து என் மடிக்கணினி சன்னலில் மெய்நிகர் ஆனது. என் எண்ணங்கள் சண்டை இடுகின்றன. பாதங்கள் காற்றில் வேகமாக பரவுகின்றன. கொரோனா கிருமியுடன் சேர்ந்து வரும் பாதங்களை அப்படியே சாப்பிடுகிறேன். என் மூளை பனி போல் உறைந்து போனது. என் கண்கள் சோர்வில் நீண்டுகின்றன. மடிக்கணினியுடன் தூங்குகிறேன். மீண்டும் பள்ளி திறந்தது. அதிகாலையில் அவசரமாக பள்ளிக்கு செல்கிறேன். உறைந்திருந்த என் மூளை முளைத்தது மறுமலர்ச்சியுடன். தேங்க்யூ.
தீயினால் சுட்டாலும் என் மானம் உங்களுடையதைப் போல அன்று. என் பகலும் இரவும் உங்களுடையதைப் போல அன்று. என் ஜன்னல் காட்சிகளில் பறவைகள் பறப்பதில்லை. ஹயாசந்த் என்ற பெயருடைய நண்பன் எனக்குண்டு. பியோனி பூக்கள் பூத்திருக்கும் என் தலையணைகளில் அக்காஷியா பூவின் நிறம் என்னவென்று தெரியவில்லை. ஆனால் இந்த பூக்கள் பூத்தால் கந்தக வாசம் வீசும் என்கிறார்கள். இது பற்றி ஆசிரியர் மரியாவிடம் கேட்க வேண்டும். ஆசிரியர் மரியாவுக்கு நிறைய விஷயங்கள் தெரியும். நானும் ஒரு நாள் ஆசிரியர் ஆவேன். அவரை போல குழந்தைகளுக்கு கதைகள் சொல்வேன். இன்று வகுப்பில் மரியா தேவதை கதை சொல்லுவார். என் தோழி எனக்காக இறைச்சி மாவு உருண்டை எடுத்து வருவார். அவளுக்காக நான் வரைந்து வைத்திருந்த ஓவியத்தை என் பையில் வைத்திருந்தேன். என் முதுகில் மாட்டியிருந்த பை முழுவதுமாக எரிந்துவிட்டது. அம்மா அணிவித்த பிங்க் நிற லேஸ் வைத்து தைத்த கவுன் உருகிவிட்டது. ஆசிரியர் மரியாவிடம் சொல்ல வேண்டும், தீயினால் சுட்டாலும் ஆறாதென்பதை. அம்மா, காயமுறாத உன் இடது செவியில் நான் சொல்வதை கேள். மெழுகுவர்த்தி எரிய அஞ்சலிகள் வேண்டாம் எனக்கு. அப்படியே ஆசிரியர் மரியாவிடம் கேளுங்கள், ஆலிஸின் அற்புத உலகம் எப்போது மலரும் என்று. தேங்க்யூ.
அனைவருக்கும் வணக்கம். கடலின் சிகரம். கடல் நிறைந்த இடத்தில் அலைகள் மட்டுமே இருந்தன. கடல் நிறைந்த இடத்தில் அலைகள் மட்டுமே இருந்தன. உயிர்த்தெழுந்த அலைகள் செதுக்கப்பட்டன. உயிர்த்தெழுந்த அலைகள் செதுக்கப்பட்டன. மீன்பிடி கிராமம் நகரமானது. மீன்பிடி கிராமம் நகரமானது. ஒவ்வொரு கட்டடத்திலுள்ள நீரின் அசைவும் போற்றப்படும் இடமாக மாறியது. ஒவ்வொரு கட்டடத்திலுள்ள நீரின் அசைவும் போற்றப்படும் இடமாக மாறியது. இப்போது கடலின் இடத்தில் வானம் இருந்தது. இப்போது கடலின் இடத்தில் வானம் இருந்தது. நன்றி. I would like to read the English translation of my Tamil poetry, Kadalin Sigaram. Peak of the seas. Only waves were present in that sea-filled island. Only waves were present in that sea-filled island. Waves, now rejuvenated, were carved, shaped. Waves, now rejuvenated, were carved, shaped. The once fishing island, now a place of awe. The once fishing island, now a place of awe. And now, in the place of the sea is the sky. And now, in the place of the sea is the sky. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that's another type of documentary poetry. It exemplifies the true Singaporean spirit with the richness of the languages and cultures represented. So, ladies and gentlemen, the final item in our opening ceremony tonight is a short film adapted from the Chinese poem Ho星洲的早上 of Dr Tan Chee Lay. The film brings the audience into the world of a morning radio program. It mourns the very last publication of a Chinese newspaper on the last day of 2022. The film brings us through different times and spaces in which Singaporeans interact with hard copy newspapers, our tradition, our disorder, and our cultural habits. So the title of the film is Morning Times, Zao Dun by Ong Leang Ren. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's watch this film.
报纸甲咱的人文历史形影不离。在社会混乱的年代，黑字、白纸造就武术本地文化人才。也因此做这个报纸，在早时的社会，算讲是咧做好事，功德无量啊。无论时代是黑白色的，还是彩色的，报纸毋仅是早起补脑的好料，即使过了期的报纸，伊会用的所在也实在是有够多啦。 山顶的时代，伊互人方便；菜色的时代啊，无论是伫咧切玻璃啦、收菜啦、刻月亮、路路皆有这个报纸的贡献。但嘛毋过有一句话讲啊，诚好势：花开花落花看破，缘来缘散缘如水。无论这个咖啡啊有偌好啉，也定着要有人家啉、家欣赏。报纸的形体即将改变，后日开始，咱厝内的玻璃、青菜、月亮，就要换一个方式去家处理。咱也毋免去怨叹这个人生去无踪啊，咱也毋免去怨叹这个人生去不留。小弟啊，在这点了一首歌，让咱大家用这个报纸经历，最近啊来迎来这个新时代。
Of Poetry Festival Singapore to come up front, and we will present a token of appreciation to our guest of honor, Madam Goh Beng Choo. Okay, we have another treat for everyone. If you can just look outside the glass doors there, there's a Volto mask art installation put up by some students from Republic Polytechnique, right? And so the Volto or the larva are ghost masks, commonly known as the white full face mask. And it comes from the Italian word which means countenance. And you're most welcome to choose any of the masks there. As a blank canvas, you can draw, paint, or write poetry on the mask in any language you like. And so these will then be showcased on a black wall draped across a metal framework as an alternative to plain white masks or plain blue masks during the pandemic. So this art installation is curated and organized by the students of Republic Polytechnique in collaboration with PFS and LaSalle College of the Arts, Nyan Kongsi Library. So we'd like to also extend our gratitude to our supporters, the National Arts Council, and our partners like the Ministry of Education, Gifted Education Branch, LaSalle College of the Arts, the Arts House, the Singapore Book Council, National University of Singapore, Nanyang Technological Universities, Asia Creative Writing Program, Republic Polytechnique, the Indian Women's Association, Sanrakshan, the National Library, and the Tapestry Project. We would also like to thank our donors, such as the estate of Ing Pean and our sponsor, Books Kinokuniya. Right, so the opening ceremony has come to a close, but the Poetry Festival has just begun. And you are all invited to stay to listen to Rick Kobak's song, poet in residence at the National Gallery, Singapore. And his poetry traces correspondences between verse and the visual arts in communicating his vision of contemporary Singapore. So have a poetic evening and weekend. Thank you very much. And the conversation with Rick Kobak's song starts at 7:30 p.m. I hear.